Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the panel on conservatives on cannabis that I've been speaking to a number of people over the weekend and told me that they were looking forward very much to this panel. I'm sorry to disappoint any of you who are hoping there will not be any free samples handed out, but we do hope to provide you with lots of interesting conversation. Before I introduce our panelists, I'm going to make a quick note about the format and the intent for this panel. And so when John and Colin at the Manning Center asked me if I would be willing to moderate this panel, they described it very much as a panel that would not be debating whether or not we should be legalizing marijuana, but some perspectives going forward on the assumption that the government will keep its promise, which of course is still very much an open question. But I think that we all probably have a few different perspectives in the room as far as whether people believe we should or should not legalize, and I suspect that no one's minds will be changed on that particular question by anything that they hear today. But I think we've got some great panelists, and I think they're going to be able to provide lots of interesting comments and thoughts within that framework. We're going to start off with a few minutes of questions statements from our panelists, and then move into questions from the audience. I saw Derek Frum walking in. Is Derek still strong? Derek's back there. If anyone can see Derek, he's a very big guy. He posts a lot on Facebook about how much he is deadlifting, and so I'm going to task Derek to moderate our Q&A. So if anyone feels the need to make a speech about how you feel marijuana should not be legalized, or make a speech about some topic rather than asking a question for our panelists, then Derek has full license to escort you kindly from the room out to the coffee break. With that, I'll move on to introducing our speakers. Dr. Daniel Lindsay has been a practicing physician for 35 years. He started his career as an emergency physician and is currently practicing as a medical specialist in the field of radiology. His contributions to the practice of medicine have been recognized extensively, receiving, among other distinctions, the Doctor of the Year Award in Manitoba for 2012. And he's also volunteered to serve 5 tours of duty as a radiologist in Kandahar during Canada's involvement in the war in Afghanistan. Dr. Dean Vause is the Executive Director of the Alberta Adolescent Recovery Centre. He started his career in high schools where he taught, counseled, and developed programs to help youth in the education system. Dr. Vause is considered to be a leading expert in the field of adolescent addiction and is a recipient of the Rotary International Paul Harris Fellowship, the highest honor in Rotary. His other awards include Calgary Citizen of the Year and the Alberta Centennial Medal. And finally, Dr. Karen O'Keefe works for the largest marijuana policy reform organization in the United States, the Marijuana Policy Project. She's played a key role in the passage of 9 medical marijuana laws and 4 decriminalization laws, and in the implementation of Alaska's initiative to allow and regulate marijuana for adult use. Karen earned her JD from Loyola School of Law in New Orleans and her Bachelor of Arts from Michigan State University. And with that, I'll ask Dr. Lindsay to come to the podium and make his comments.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Matt. Matt, at the beginning, showed me his fist, and he said, if you go over 10 minutes, you're in trouble. Matt, you went over your 5-minute allotted time. So where's the enforcer? So as Matt had said, my background is I started as an emergency physician and actually looking after patients, and then became a medical specialist as I was going through. And over the last probably 12 years, I've been heavily involved in regulatory bodies with colleges and with national organizations that regulate, among other things. So the discussion today, we've been given the assumption that there is going to be legalization of marijuana, and the discussions at the periphery of that were considered not to be germane. So the question is, in the current climate of that legislative initiative, what are we actually trying to accomplish here? What is the problem that we're trying to fix by legislating this, and what is the political, and I think that we need to actually separate in our minds what the difference is between the political agenda that is currently on the table and is in front of us and we're talking about today, and good governance, and whether that in fact is something that we should be doing. So I just want to state at the beginning, because I am still heavily involved in regulatory bodies, that my views have certainly been shaped by my background, but that what I'm going to be saying to you today comes from my heart and from me personally, and I'm not representing any medical authority or regulatory body at the present time. What at the beginning of this, I was asked if I would actually participate in it, and we got into the discussion, and I realized that there is a fair amount of confusion in Canada and among individuals that are expressing their opinions with regard to two issues, as I see, with regard to the discussion that we have to have. And the first is that there are two different ways of looking at marijuana. The first is from the medical point of view, and the second is from the entertainment point of view. So we're in the second one, which is what we're talking about right now in a bilingual country, is the Maird and Giggle side of this drug. So let's just talk about the medical and put it in context. So the argument for medical use of marijuana has always been around the argument that there was a legitimate medical role for marijuana and that patients were being denied access to something that was legitimately useful for them. And those legal processes started really even prior to 2000, but in Ontario to begin with, there was legal action that resulted in the marijuana medical access regulations, which allowed patients access to marijuana. That was subsequently struck down in Sections 4 and 7 in 2011, and it was replaced by the Medical Marijuana Access Program, which is currently what we have at the present time. So when we look at medicine and we look at drugs and we look at what we're trying to do, and I know that all of you are aware of this already, if we look at insulin, insulin was not in our population beforehand. People looked at that drug and they said, is it worthwhile from a risk point of view? And when we look at that, we can kill people with insulin, but we save countless lives with it. When we look at antibiotics, it's the same argument. When we look at vaccinations and smallpox, it's the same argument. We don't have smallpox in the world at the present time. But when we come to marijuana, we tend to think of it as the same element, but we don't recognize that there's 400 different compounds in marijuana. It's not one element. And we know THC, we know the cannabinoids, we know these, but it's a big complex question. We're not treating diabetes with this. We're treating a myriad of conditions that people have said that it helps with, from glaucoma to epilepsy to nausea to appetite. And in the original submissions, legal submissions, it was pain and suffering, that general broad context of what we're doing. The challenge with insulin and penicillin and all of those other things is that before we actually bring those into our population, there was a responsibility to establish the burden of proof that they were worthwhile and that the risks were worth the benefits were worth the risks. The challenge with marijuana is it already got a high utilization. From a medical point of view, it never went through those regulatory bodies. People have decided among themselves whether it's useful from a medical point of view or from a recreational point of view. So we have no studies. And that is why, and most people don't understand that, is that when people think that they can get a prescription from their doctor for marijuana, you're not getting a prescription. Marijuana is not a drug. It's not a medicine. And you don't get a prescription for marijuana under these acts. You get authorized. And the reason is that physicians pushed back and they said, we don't know enough about this drug to be able to give you the risks and the benefits. So there are regulations and guidelines for physicians in authorizing it, but no physician actually prescribes this medication. So the challenge that we have right now is that there's a degree of variability across the country. In some jurisdictions in the country, medical marijuana is used, and it can only be authorized by physicians, and you are only able to authorize it if you continue to be the physician of record in looking after that patient, and you need to monitor the patient and see if the patient's getting better on this medication. We have other jurisdictions, and I think that, as you know, as you move to the west, where you don't even have to see the patient. You don't have to monitor the patient. Physicians are complemented by their nurse practitioners. You can go on phone, you can go on Facebook, and you can get authorization for it, and you never go back to that original person to see whether you've actually benefited from it. So the question from the physician's point of view is that they feel that they're being pushed into a position of being drug dealers in Canada. So when we look at the second, so there's the medical, let's just put that off the side. So now what we're talking about is with this legislation, recreation. We're talking about getting high and legislating that. So let's not mince words. That's actually what we're doing. The polls are telling us that the majority of Canadians want marijuana legalized. But when you go and you ask people, they'll tell you that, yes, I think we should legalize it because I think it helps people. It helps with their glaucoma. It helps with these medical conditions. And that's a big part of it. People then talk about the safety element of it. So what's happening is that people are accessing the medical side to get the drug so that they can get high, for all intents and purposes. So the things that we got to talk about when we're talking about this kind of legislation is, what's the cost of law enforcement? Do we want to reduce crime? And it has to be in the context of the reality of the use at the present time in our country. So what are we talking about as conservatives? We're talking about the balancing of individual liberties. We're talking about our need to reduce crime and mitigate risk. And we're talking about good governance. And good governance is based on good information. And at the present time, it would be my position that we don't have good information with regard to this. In terms of managing the risks, I'm looking at my time, the argument is that marijuana is safer than alcohol, so let's just go for it. And one of the quotes when I was preparing this lecture that somebody gave to me is that, Dr. Lindsay, nobody ever made a pass at your spouse or killed your kids when stoned. And that is sort of the context that we're in as we're looking at this relative to alcohol. There is a low-risk assumption with regard to marijuana. And that low-risk assumption in terms of our risk of it is that the argument is coming from a lot of the industries, from Shoppers Drug Mart to liquor commissions to everybody else who's polling to try and get into this business, that it's low risk and let's go for it because there's money to be made here. What's the next risk? There's this perception now that it's cool in our country to do it. We have a prime minister who is sexy, who is on the cover of Vogue. I don't know exactly what he's been doing, but he's been, posing for magazines. He's got great hair, and he smokes dope while he's a member of Parliament. And so we really have to counteract that, I think, and we have to push back and say it's maybe not all that cool, quite frankly. There's an argument that youth will have less access to marijuana if we regulate it. And that argument has been repeated many times, and most of us know that when we were 16 or 17 years of age that we could get alcohol. And I challenge anybody to say that the access to alcohol went down after Prohibition. And then we've got the risk of the political promise that has been made. And that political promise was made perhaps on popularity and opinion. The challenge is that that initiative, if it ignores the lack of science, is fraught with challenges. There's a risk to conservatives here as being seen as being arbitrary and rigid if we don't have the evidence to actually back it up. So we need to have good evidence. So where's the path forward? I've got about 60 seconds. We need to go slow. Alcohol is interwoven in our society, and marijuana isn't at the present time. We need a mechanism to reverse bad decisions. We need to educate people to the risks, and we haven't yet actually fully articulated those. We know that there's risks associated with learning, with our ability to develop the brain in terms of the endocannabinoids. We need to address the very difficult question of at what point should there be access to it, because so many people are telling us in this area that the brain is developing up until 24 or 25 years of age. And we need to ask the question, why as a nation we would be the first nation to do this in the G7? Why we are asking ourselves to be the bleeding edge on this, and why we're being the guinea pigs in the G7 community. So these are my personal beliefs. So I want to leave you just with two quotes. I have a wonderful friend who is an adolescent psychiatrist who said to me, I know that you're going to be giving a talk on this, and I want you to express to the community my concerns of the gentle, developing adolescent brain. And I have another quote which was from a wonderful friend of mine, and I'm just going to read this to you, because he sent this to me knowing that I was going to do this. John Stinson, who is the CEO of Manitoba Liquor and Lotteries, Crown Corporation, says, most folks are not ready to purchase their favorite wine next to a bin of Hindu Kush sativa. We need to take the legalization and distribution of recreational marijuana slowly. and treat it like a fragile origami sculpture rather than go full steam ahead as if it were just another new recreational product like a hula hoop or a frisbee. So my history is, and my background is regulatory. I can tell you that from my past experience, regulating almost anything is an extremely challenging and extremely expensive proposition. And unlike budgets that will balance themselves, marijuana is a complex issue, and we really need to think about it. So with that, I will finish. We're going to do a small poll here, and anybody that uses marijuana, we'd like you to use the right-hand microphones, and anybody that doesn't use marijuana, please use the left-hand microphones when we finish the conversation. Thank you very much.
I don't know, Doc. I think you're kind of sexy. I don't know if that works in addiction here. Where do I start here? I guess we've accepted we're going to legalize marijuana. I'm going to go tell you exactly where I'm coming from. I've spent 30 years working in this field. And just like this doc is saying here, it's complex. It's ugly. It's horrific. This is not a benign drug. And I just want to share with you, this is a conservative meeting here. I treat NDP and Liberal at our center. Takes longer than normal, but we can get there. And believe me, I've had the leader of the NDP in my treatment center. When it comes down to your kids, this is a different ballgame. It's not political. And what he's saying is dead on. I've spent 30 years working in this field. What I'm going to talk about today, and what do I got, 40 minutes, Matt? You know, how do you do that in 10 minutes to talk about a complex issue that we're talking about, that we've decided that we're going to legislate it? And he's talking about it being slow. I've spent 30 years working with kids, doing the research. My doctoral work is in adolescent addiction. My master's was in adolescent addiction, and I've spent 30 years working with kids that lives have been shattered by this. This is not a benign drug. And we're talking recreation. Medical part of it is another argument. We're talking about legislating something that, and I'm talking about youth. The number one issue I've seen in 30 years, drugs. Number one illicit drug that's damaging your kids, marijuana. So all of a sudden we've made this decision and we're pushing this agenda. Now that's going to be up to you. I'm going to go back to my center in Calgary. I've been there 26 years. And I work with the kids and families, every walk of life, from high end to low end, every political spectrum. When your kid sits in front of me, I am your biggest nightmare. I'm telling you. I am your biggest nightmare for you to sit across from me and your kid is on drugs. Biggest fear of parents. And it should be. So when you come in to see me at ARC, this is my job, and I love this part. And you say you get passionate. I'm passionate about what I'm doing, believe me. But this is the toughest thing I've ever done, bar none. But it's not just passion. It's what this gentleman is saying. The work that I'm talking to you about is research-based. It's just not about popularity. If being a good parent is about being sexy, we're in trouble. Being a good prime minister is being sexy, we're in trouble because people won't want to hear what I got to say. I will not walk into a high school without taking my kids that have recovered from addiction. And you want to treat a kid, you want to go that far and treat a kid that's addicted to drugs, to marijuana. 92% of our kids, our research says, primary drug of choice in our center is marijuana. Same with North America. Most illicit, treated kids in treatment, marijuana. So when you come into my center, and I've been there 26 years, my job is to talk to that kid in the front row, and my job is for that kid to succeed. My job is for that family to succeed, and they've been ravaged. And they don't care. I'll tell you, they vote. They vote, and you go talk to every parent that's walked into that center. You ask them what they think about legalization when it's your kid's life on the line. No, I'm going to go right down to reality. And it changed my life and changed how I viewed this. So I went and did the research. But when I got a kid that calls me and says, Doc, I've just killed somebody, that's what I deal with. Doesn't matter if you're a doctor. Doesn't matter you've done 30 years research. He says, I've killed somebody, help me. Should I help that kid? Primary drug of choice, one of his polydrug use, marijuana. You know, and I can give you examples, and I don't have time to do that. Come by and see me in Calgary. Come by and talk to that kid that murdered someone that's 9 years sober today, and that's where that drug took him. He was an incredible young man. The parents are you. Fantastic family. I get the call from a parent, and it says, Doc, my kid is dead, and he's in my bedroom, in his bedroom dead. 3 fentanyl deaths last year. It's like Russian roulette. Bam. And they're dead. There is nothing more painful than a parent phoning me and telling me their kid is dead. Next level, my kid murdered somebody. He was on drugs. Good family, good people. It's not denial, I'll tell you that. Now, where does that leave us with this? You know, how do I bring this into what we're talking about today? Huge link between marijuana in youth and psychosis. I get a call from a parent. The kid has thrown himself off the parking lot at Foothills Hospital because he couldn't shut off the voices in his head. You want to try and treat these guys? It's labor intensive. You better know what you're doing. You better know what you're dealing with. And that's not when we're talking about all this stuff. Primary drug of choice of this kid, where he started and ended, marijuana, because he doesn't think it's a benign drug. Well, those are just, I got story after story. Kids flatlining in ambulances. These guys, doctors bringing them back to life. They go back, they use again. And they use again, and they use again, and they use again. So I've changed my whole perspective in 30 years, what we're talking about here. And I think you have an ability to make an informed decision. How much have we got here? Another 10 minutes?
3 minutes.
Okay. Well, okay, so let's talk about the biggest issue that you have out there with marijuana, as I see it, is perceived risks. Kids do not believe this is a tragic, nasty drug. When the perceived risks are put in front of kids, less usage. When they're not perceiving a risk in this, more usage. So how does that work? I'll give you an example. So I work every day in this field. Every day. The denial is incredible in these kids. Now, this kid's just name happens to be Justin. And that's a true story. So I'm working with this kid, and he's going, hey, Doc, what's the big deal? They're legalizing this. Now, I'm talking about every kid that's new in ARC today. What's the big deal, pal? And I'm a doctor, you know. I've done the research. He don't care. It's legalized. And that's what he's telling me. It's not a big deal, Doc. Now, this kid's life is shattered. And what does the research say about psychosis, about family problems, about health issues? This is a timeout in every kid's development when they're using, and they don't see it as a big deal. You know what? It is personal for me. When I've had to hold that parent at the funeral or deal with that kid, it becomes personal. And I'm passionate about what I'm doing, but it's research-based, and it's honest facts. There's so much rhetoric out there, and it's killing our kids, and it's destroying our kids. So you guys make those political decisions, but beyond me. But I'll help. I don't care if it's NDP, Liberal, whoever. When that guy's sitting across from me, there's no denial. It's, Doc, can you help me? So I could go on and on and on. Let's go to the Netherlands. We look at the research. Amsterdam is one of the most violent cities in Europe. They're now rethinking their strategy on drugs and alcohol because it's hurting our youth. So I just don't think legalizing marijuana is a smart idea. I don't think it's good public safety. I don't think there's a strategy in place. This guy's, Doc is an expert. What's the strategy? Doctors don't want to become drug dealers. Our kids, when they're using, they'll get it. But what does it say even economically? And I could go off on that. There is no research to say this is an economic windfall. In fact, it's just the opposite. Because we're saying this is going to, we're going to tax this and tax that. Think of the long-term effect of one addicted kid, of kids that are limiting their potential, their future to do drugs because it's benign, it's legalized. You go down to Denver. Do you know that Denver is the #1 place for spring vacation for kids now, for university students? Why is that? You can go to the airport, they pick you up, they drive you to the dispensary, you get high on the way, you go to the hotel that's pro-marijuana, away you go. And like he said, their brain is in development. So it's the biggest threat to our youth's future. And economically, there's no research in Colorado or Washington. In fact, they're having lots of problems in the school with the kids with this usage, and that's what I'm seeing all the time. So how much time there, Manny?
You're over.
I'm over. Well, drop by my center. Drop by and talk to the kids. We're talking real issues here, the facts, and talking about youth. What do you want to do about it? What do the Conservatives want to do about this? Because when it's your kid, it's a different ballgame. I don't know if our Prime Minister's ever had an addicted kid, but I'll tell you, I'm in Stephen Harper's riding, which was previously Preston Manning. He had it right about where he was headed with this. You guys want to get weak on this and go soft on this? You're putting your youth future in jeopardy. 3 things I want to say in conclusion. These decisions are based on bad research and misinformation, liberalized views, and it's a money grab. There's nothing good that's going to happen out of this. So I don't know the solution. I'm going back to work tomorrow, but I'm going to tell you, I'm not fighting an uphill battle. I'm fighting a vertical battle with kids that are saying, not a big deal, till it's your kid that's out there destroying themselves, putting their life in jeopardy. And it's real, man, for me. So am I passionate about it? Am I passionate to you about it? Yes. Because it's research-based and it's a fact. This is a slippery slope, and if you don't do your homework and look at this, hey, there's a lot at stake here, our youth. So God bless you.
Good morning, I'm Karen O'Keefe. Not a doctor, despite the introduction, but thank you. I was asked to talk about what the states in the U.S. have done that are taking marijuana off the criminal market. In many cases, voters have seen that prohibition simply isn't working. We have no control over who's selling marijuana, when it's sold, or what the circumstances are. So they decided to regulate marijuana instead. There are 4 states that have done so far, and as many as 6 or 7 more might this year. The first retail stores for marijuana opened in the U.S. in 2014 in Colorado and Washington. In Oregon, medical marijuana dispensaries are allowed to serve adults while they set up the rules and the licensing for adult use stores. And in Alaska, marijuana stores will be licensed later this year. Although marijuana is far less harmful than alcohol, both in terms of its toxicity, its addiction level, and its link to violence and aggression, states have regulated it in a very cautious manner that's generally much more restrictive than how they've regulated alcohol. I'll go through some of the key elements of the state laws and some of the lessons that have been learned while implementing them that might inform policy choices for you here in Canada. We'll start with individual freedoms and then move on to the legal market. Now, of course, all of the states that have legalized marijuana have only done so for adults. They've all used the same age that we use in the states for alcohol consumption, and that's 21. 3 of the states have allowed adults to grow a small amount of marijuana, 4 to 6 plants in a secure, locked location, whereas Washington state has not allowed any home cultivation, although every state in the U.S. allows home brewing of beer. The amount that's allowed is limited, unlike alcohol. A person can possess no more than an ounce, or about 28.5 grams of marijuana, or in the states where cultivation's allowed, they're also allowed to possess extra that's grown from their own plants. Now, shifting to the newly regulated above-ground market. In all 4 of the states, marijuana is produced and distributed by private businesses that have specific state licenses just for that activity. In the US, we can't have the state employees be in charge of a retail store because marijuana is actually federally illegal in the US, and that would be preempted if you required state workers to violate federal law. That law is not really enforced against those that are complying with state law, but it still is an impediment to certain things. The standard in these states is to have 4 different types of businesses. First, you have the growers. Second, you have manufacturers of edible products and other products like teas. Next, you have the retailers. And finally, you have laboratories. Some of the restrictions that states have in place are that in every one of the states, there would not be impulse purchases. You have to specifically go to a standalone marijuana store. They're not sold at grocery stores or restaurants or bars. There is a problem in some states that there's not really any place other than a private home for people to consume marijuana. So they're looking at having cannabis cafes in Alaska, and that's expected later this year. And in Colorado, they're also looking at having a limited number of locations that people can go to consume in public that's limited to people that want to be exposed to it. Edibles have been an issue of concern. Those are food products that are infused with marijuana. There's a concern that minors might confuse them for other kinds of foods that don't have marijuana in them. And also some adults have consumed edible products and not had the intended effect and then consume more, and it takes a while to take effect, and they have gotten way more intoxicated than intended. So states and also the nonprofit I work for have been working on educating people about that. We have a Consume Responsibly campaign that works on both talking about keeping marijuana away from children and also advising people to start low and to go slow. You also see in Washington State, the state requires every single product to be approved for edible products by regulators. So for example, they don't allow gummy bears. The kind of flavors you might have would be chili or ginger instead of flavors that would be more appealing to youth. And we're also seeing child-proof packaging to reduce the chance of accidental ingestion from minors. Another area Washington State went overboard on was one area they went overboard on is they had a buffer zone from a number of locations and stores. And it was a 1,000-foot buffer from schools, libraries, parks, and a number of other locations. And unfortunately, the end result was in Seattle. There was nowhere downtown that these stores could locate, so they're all in a warehouse district. So they're relaxing it a little bit to keep the buffer from schools and to allow cities to have some flexibility so that there will be stores and so that they can outcompete the criminal market and have locations people can find and go to. Whereas when consumers buy marijuana in the criminal market, they have no idea what's in it. It could have dangerous pesticides. It could even be laced with other drugs, and they have no idea what the potency is. In these states, they have laws and regulations for what kind of pesticides can be used, to require testing for potency, and often to also require testing for other contaminants. Now, shifting to the issue of how many businesses are allowed and how they're selected. In Colorado, the state decided to allow essentially any business that complies with all of the state laws and rules, and also they allowed for a lot of local control. So a locality could either completely ban businesses, or they could have a set number, or they could decide to control it through zoning restrictions. In Washington, the state decided to kind of engineer how this would be regulated, and they set a total number of stores that would be allowed statewide and did the application process themselves and ended up with 334. It was a bit low, so they're looking at expanding it to 550 while wrapping in a medical marijuana program that has largely been unregulated into it. In Washington, they also tried to control the number of square feet that would be allowed to be grown, and they spent a lot of money to figure out how much marijuana was being consumed, and they came up with 3 million square feet. And it was not nearly enough, unfortunately, so you ended up with high prices and inadequate supply. So I wouldn't recommend that, or at least would recommend having a much higher number that they use. They have since abandoned the limit. Now, shifting to taxation, of course, one of the reasons to regulate and control marijuana is to undercut the criminal market and to control it. So it's important that a tax rate not be so high that the criminal market can outcompete the legal regulated market. Another thing to keep in mind is that a lot of these businesses it's expected that prices will plummet in time or will go down substantially because most of the cost of marijuana is due to its illegality. At first, that's not the case. At first, costs have been very, very high because there are a lot of investments to comply with all the regulations, to get the land, and for taxation. So Washington, for example, started at taxing at 25% at 3 different points of transfer, and that was far too high, and they ended up having to reduce it to 37%. So one possibility would be starting at a lower tax rate and then in time possibly increasing the tax rate to do the opposite of what Washington has done and make sure that you can outcompete the criminal market. 3 of the states tax as a percentage of the price, whereas Alaska taxes at $50 an ounce when the marijuana is transferred from growers to the infused product makers or to the retail stores. In most of the cases, revenue is used for public education. One of the reasons that teens may think marijuana is not risky is they don't find most of the education very credible, so having a good public education campaign that's focused specifically on risks to minors can be very important. Interestingly, in both Colorado and Washington, teen marijuana use has not gone up statistically at all since it's been legal, and the advertising has also been very restrictive. So when I was in Seattle, I didn't see any ads for marijuana, but I did see 2 posters in the public transit saying, "Talk to your children about marijuana," to tell them the risks. So overall, while the rules and public education campaigns have had some fine-tuning and may need some more, as a whole, these new approaches to marijuana have been very successful. Even a number of skeptics have acknowledged that the sky has not fallen. The states have created hundreds of business opportunities. There are 25,000 jobs directly in the marijuana industry in Colorado alone, while they've generated a lot of needed revenue, $135 million just in Colorado in tax revenue. And at the same time, they've undercut the criminal market and treated adults like grown-ups by letting them make their own decisions about a product that's safer than alcohol.
Congratulations to the honorary Dr. O'Keefe for going 1 minute under time. So if we get to the end, she may have a minute left there we can use. I'm looking to see if there's anyone who wants to identify whether they do or do not use marijuana by rushing to the microphone, and it's
The right side of the microphone.
It's Peter McCaffrey. I can't. Which is this? Is the user side or the non-user side?
Well, you know, I saw him with nachos not long ago.
That's very incriminating.
Which microphone do I use for no comment? I believe that's still my right. This is Peter. I'm Peter McCaffrey. I'm the Director of Research for the Manning Centre. And the more I look into this issue, the more it seems to be a question between idealism and realism. And that all of the problems that are identified on stage today may or may not exist, but even if they do, they exist in a scenario where this is all illegal. Mm-hmm. So if you're identifying all of these problems at the moment, then clearly the system is not working. And so my question is, conservatives tend to be very realist when it comes to economic policy. We look at idealistic policies from NDP or Liberal governments on the economy. We say, look, they're saying this is what's going to happen, but in reality, this is the way the world works. Why, when we get to these social issues, do conservatives suddenly become idealists?
Anyone want to?
I'm happy to I'm sure that people have comments on that. I think that is the challenge. I think that is an extremely a valid statement, and I think that from the point of view of credibility and managing, that is what conservatives are good about, and we tend not to be as good in this particular area because we come to it with a bias. But there's no question that unlike all the other areas that we regulate, this one is already out there and it's already a problem. So the challenge for us is how to manage the problem. So from the regulatory point of view, the medical side, we've got that pretty much managed. What we're not managing at all is this other side, and there are compelling arguments to bringing it into a regulatory process. The challenge, though, is how to do it. How do we, if we go along the line, for example, of having people in Canada, a lot of the legal ages are 18. So our assumption is that our youth are far more reasonable than the youth in the United States. And as soon as you cross that 49th parallel. So we now have to make an argument that we allow people to go to war at 18, we allow people to buy alcohol at 18, and that is one of the beginning points of the endocannabinoid system for the development of the brain. So the challenge is regulating now and bringing in legislation and bringing in a mechanism to manage something without really knowing what the risks are, because it's been illegal for so long that we don't have the studies. So we're trying to make decisions without information, and that's a problem.
Anyone else want to chime in? Other microphone, Alex?
Hi, my name is Alexei Simikov. I'm president of the Campus Association at McGill University. I'd like to say that I've smoked marijuana in the past several times. I have a lot of friends in this room and in this conference, and they've smoked marijuana. A lot of us have amazing GPAs. We're activists or volunteers. We contribute to our society in meaningful ways. And for the vast majority of us, we have not struggled with marijuana in any kind of significant sense to our life, other than maybe eating too many chips.
Yeah.
I like to speak to the doctor in the middle. I sympathize with the concerns of those students and the young people you treat, and that's devastating. I have had friends with mental illness, and it's very effective, and that speaks to the lack of a mental health strategy in Canada, and we need to address that. But there's a difference between correlation and causation. Every person in this room under 30 cringed to the fear-mongering propaganda, and I like to speak confidently that when we become the leadership of this party, we will be legalizing it because there is research. The research doesn't agree with you. We need to do it intelligently, and the way to move forward is to have an intelligent dialogue as to how to limit those risks, not to speak rhetoric about Justin's and how they're smoking weed, so we shouldn't be smoking weed or something. Thank you very much for your comments. I mean, we definitely need to have more conversation about the actual strategy to implement those, and we need to use the research that's happened in the States, and that's the kind of conversation I wanted here, not a conversation about small children who are killing people or jumping off roofs, which is a concern for mental health, and psychiatrists and should be addressed to that sense. Thank you for your time here.
Because I don't think there was a question there, we're going to go right back over to Roy, who I trust will have a question.
Yes, well, I'm also a physician, and, we can prescribe marijuana, but, the CMPA actually tells you, our insurance people actually tells me not to prescribe it. I've come to the conclusion it's going to be legalized, but the problem is there are risks, and the risks sort of end around the mid-20s, the 23, 24, and how are we going to sort of adjust that? Even Justin has said that he doesn't think people should smoke marijuana until they're 24 or 25. So, I mean, I don't know what kind of regulatory thing you're going to do. Are you seeing more psychosis in the U.S. now since the legalization? That was my question.
I believe not. One interesting thing is that while there's some thinking that marijuana use might be linked to psychosis, I know that in societies that have seen increased marijuana use, or when you compare one society to another with a higher marijuana use, you don't see an increase in psychosis, which does raise questions about that. Regarding the age, of course, about half of all Americans have used marijuana, and I don't know what the numbers are here, but I suspect they're similar. So right now, people in their low 20s are already using it anyways, and I think at the point you're an adult, you can have honest education and maybe have a little, in the US, if you have a prescription, you have risks and benefits. You could have something like that to let people know about the specific risks of people of their age, if there is evidence that there is a specific risk, and let them make a decision like an adult. We've seen a lot of success with education about the risks of smoking. Of course, smoking is way riskier than marijuana. It kills about 400,000 Americans a year. But with honest education, you can make a difference in people's behavior. You don't need to treat them like infants and criminalize them. Well, we don't criminalize infants, but punish them for making their own decisions.
Well, I disagree. While I appreciate this guy's comment, I'm talking about youth. I really, your brain is in development until you're 24. Now, I might have felt the same way as this gentleman 30 years ago. Once you start talking about the research on good research, I can get, I get up there and I'm passionate. Don't take away the fact that I've done 30 years of research on adolescence and psychosis and the harms. And there's no research, long-term research on legalization and how it affects adolescence and psychosis. We know over 30 years the link between marijuana and psychosis. And it's a matter of perception. He says drugs don't affect him. Well, do you know this guy? I don't know. That's a matter of perception. How does it, he's evangelical. I'm evangelical about this. And it's not just based on passion, guys. Yeah, I'm passionate. You've never sat at the end of a casket of a kid. You got through it. This is in your mama's pot, buddy. And in Denver, what they're putting out in Denver is 3 times the potency of what's coming in from Mexico. That makes it highly addictive for youth. And you're right, they're going to get it. So I'm not just kind of just blowing a bunch of passion here. What's wrong? I'm talking about real issues here, real facts. And that's what we're doing. This Doc's saying there's confusion out there. So it's a very passionate issue. I agree with that. But I've had to go back down and talk to the population. It's not just 1 or 2 kids, guys. It's the number one issue with youth. And they don't see it as a perceived risk. That's a fact. And there is increased, the research I'm seeing in Colorado and Washington, usage is up. Problems are up. That's 1 or 2 years. I'm talking 30 years of research. I don't want to come up here. I'm telling you, I don't like coming to conferences or just throwing this grenade in there because that's how it's viewed. I'd rather go back to work and try and help these kids and families. You know who's the best message for carrying this message? It isn't me. It's that kid that was destroyed by this. The parents that say, this is a slippery slope. I probably agreed with that way back then, and they see it different. I see it different. But am I passionate about it and I'm just an alarmist? You should be alarmed. You should be alarmed with where we're going with this. And even economically, you say, well, we're conservatives. We just look at the economics. I'll tell you, that NDP guy, he cared about his kid, and so did the conservatives. You care about your kids in the future and what's going in there. Do your homework. Don't get up and just beak off. Show me your research. I'll show you mine. And then I'll have you meet a kid or a family that lost their kids to this. And when it's your kid, it's a different ballgame. So I don't think I'm just going up here and being an alarmist. I'm telling you the facts of what I've learned by working on the reserves of Saskatchewan 30 years ago and watching the number one issue.
We've got a lot of people on the mic, so maybe we can go back over here.
Hi, my name is Dean T. Harris. I'm here with the Libertarian Party of Canada. I was the candidate in Ottawa Centre in October. So one of the core conservative principles is supposed to be promotion of free market ideals, and that includes the right for people to make bad decisions, to make distasteful decisions, and conservatives generally accept that in the economic realm. If you make a bad investment, you're going to be responsible for the ramifications of that. We accept that for the most part with social decisions about our health and well-being. So what is different about marijuana that makes it appropriate to use the force of government to make decisions for people and not allow them to make decisions and live with the consequences of them?
Yeah, I'm happy to initially address that. And just before I do that, I think that your comments with regard to age and information are absolutely germane. And they tie right into your comments in terms of a libertarian point of view. It's based on respect for the individual, isn't it? And it's based on information. And I think that like John Stinson, who is the CEO, when he says that there needs to be caution in terms of where we're going, it's that we can be as libertarian as we want, but our decisions are as sound as the information that we have when we're making those decisions. It's very much like the analogy with stocks. If you're not given the information and you make a bad financial decision, it's your right to make that decision. But I would suspect that you also want to have appropriate information before buying that stock. And that's really what we're talking about here. We have started a process, and we're moving down a line because so many people are using it already that we have to manage the problems as the gentleman referred to before. But we're doing it in an environment where we don't have all the information. And I think that there are people there that are just saying there needs to be a degree of caution in terms of the process. Let's watch what we're doing. And if we make the wrong decision, often the regulatory structures are so big and so large, it's very difficult to pull back if a bad decision has been made. So I don't think that anybody would question you in terms of your libertarian point of view, and that needs to be respected.
Mike Waite from Edmonton, Alberta. Could any of you talk about the differences or what it means between decriminalization and legalization? Are they one and the same, or does legalization offer a solution in terms of framework that maybe decriminalization alone does not?
So they're fuzzy terms. So the way we use them at the Marijuana Policy Project is decriminalization is when you no longer jail somebody for possessing marijuana. So it does nothing with the market itself. Whereas legalization would involve making it completely legal. Under decriminalization, this person may still get a fine, possibly. But with legalization, it's totally legal for an adult to possess it, and ideally it sets up a regulatory structure so you can purchase it and you do away with the entire criminal market instead of keeping sales on the illicit market.
Over this side.
Yes, my name is Roger Proctor, and I'm CEO of Gen X Capital. I just want to say that the way the Conservative Party has handled the cannabis file is nothing short of outrageous, and that can be demonstrated in the decision of Justice Fallon in the Allard decision that came out on Wednesday. The court, in a 107-page report and decision, came out and said that nobody has ever died from a medical marijuana overdose. And it seems to me that until the Conservatives get beyond the debate of whether there's a medical use or not, it's going to be a dinosaur party and will not get reelected on this issue. When is it going to take, what's it going to take for the Conservatives to get beyond that?
Anyone want to speak for the
Well,
Conservatives?
you're wrong there. People have died, 3 in Colorado, of marijuana overdose. Let me finish. You said your piece. Let me finish. They died. No, they didn't. They died. They read the research. Yeah.
Okay,
They
well-
OD'd. Well,
Let's go back over to Ian here. Ian?
All right, thanks. Ian from London, Ontario. So my question relates to both providing information and potency. Is there a way, and is anyone looking into a way, of labeling marijuana products for potency, similar to how we label alcohol products for alcohol content?
Great question.
Yeah, there is actually, and that is required, and there are guidelines. And in fact, if you go on to almost any of the college sites, there has been collaboration across the country for physicians and for nurse practitioners in terms of what you're using and whether you're enhancing the cannabinoid side, the THC side, what the values are of that. The legislation talks about 30 times, without going into that, it's weight-based and it doesn't really reflect the potency, but potency guidelines are there for physicians, and it is expected from a regulatory point of view that the physicians will follow those.
Please.
Hi, my name's Kaylee Vokes. I'm from Keswick, Ontario. So I just observed from this panel that we have one doctor who claims there is no research, and then we have a practitioner, someone who works with addictions, who says there is all kinds of research and has only given us snippets of his anecdotal experiences. And then we have the non-doctor, who is the only one who seems to have any facts about this. And I note that I'm probably closer to the youth age that you're talking about than any of you. So I was, not that long ago in high school. And my question, I guess, is why do you think that legalizing this is going to make it more accessible to young people? Like, have you ever been to a high school? It's very easy to get a gram or two or an ounce of weed, and from a drug dealer, right? And you're funding organized crime that way. And as Ms. O'Keefe mentioned, you don't know what's in that. I've had some friends who had bad experiences from having laced marijuana, and by regulating it, you can have regulation on the content, the pesticides, and what's in it. What we were just talking about, labeling. So why do you think that this is going to be more accessible to youth? And if you say there's no research, do you think we're going to gain any research by continuing to let the criminals sell it? Won't we be better able to analyze and research and learn more about the impacts of this drug if the government is regulating it?
Dr. Lindsay?
Yeah, I think those comments are very appropriate, and I may not have expressed myself appropriately. The comment that I made was that it probably isn't going to make it any less available to people by legalizing it. So one of the challenges, one of the things that's happening is that there is a blending now of the recreational use and medical use. So what you're saying is absolutely correct. People recognize, and it's not just young people that use marijuana, people recognize that they need to use it appropriately and they want a safe drug. So what's happening at the present time is that people are moving themselves into the medical side so that they actually have a product that they know. So your comments are absolutely appropriate. The challenge that a lot of physicians have, though, in looking at this is that they are looking at the benefits of having a known product that doesn't have PCPs in it, that doesn't have heavy metals in it, that doesn't have the pesticides in it. Against the counter argument which is if we go wholesale into this and we say that it's absolutely safe and we're not absolutely sure about the safety of it, then we're potentially not exercising good governance because we don't have the information yet. So even just the age, for example, the assumption is that if an adult is of legal age, they can make a decision with regard to whether they should consume or not. Be that 18 in some jurisdictions, 21 in other jurisdictions, and it becomes arbitrary, doesn't it? So we aren't giving the information to say there is a greater risk at 23 than there is at 25, 18 versus 22. So to say that there's no research is certainly not true. But to say that we have all the information that we would like before going into this is also very true, which is why individuals say, let's go slow.
And I'm sad to say this will be our last question over here.
Donna Weston from BC. Ms. O'Keefe, you said in the beginning of your comments, I think that you just said it's a fact that alcohol is more toxic than marijuana. So, and a lot of your comments were based on that assumption. So is there evidence, are there facts to uphold that?
Sure. If you go
Thank
to marijuanaissafer.org, it's a website that my colleagues put together that has a number of studies and citations and links to the actual articles showing how much safer marijuana is than alcohol. I believe in the US they tried to figure out how much marijuana a person would have to consume to get to the lethal dose where you'd overdose. And it's not possible to consume enough to cause a fatal overdose. Whereas with alcohol, to take the desired effect, to get a little buzz, it's about 10 times as much as that it would take to kill you from overdosing from alcohol poisoning. Whereas it's not physically possible to consume enough marijuana to actually overdose in that way. So check out Marijuana is Safer. For the U.S. government has spent a lot of money trying to prove how dangerous marijuana is over a lot of years, and it's been vastly overstated, as the research has shown.